Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to be tackling a pretty big topic.
Yeah.
It's choosing a spouse.
Huge.
But we're diving into it from, a faith-based perspective. We've got this excerpt called, How Do You Avoid Mistakes When Choosing a Spouse? So maybe you're either listening and you're at a crossroads in your own love life. Or maybe you're looking for, some spiritual guidance.
Mm.
Or maybe you're just curious about how faith plays into this, this huge decision.
It's a big one.
Yeah, well, whatever brought you here, get ready. Because this excerpt dives into some pretty deep stuff.
Really does.
Like, the idea of a destiny partner versus a soulmate.
Yeah.
And how to figure out if you're following your own desires or actually, God's will. And even the tricky role that obedience plays in all of this. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how this excerpt, right away kind of challenges that popular idea of a soulmate, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like there's that one perfect person out there for everyone. And instead, it introduces this concept of a destiny partner.
Yeah.
Someone who's, aligned with God's plan for your life.
Okay, so hold on. Let's unpack that a little bit. I mean,
Sure.
does finding a destiny partner mean that? Like,
Right.
we have no choice.
Right.
Like, God just kind of drops this person into our laps and that's it.
No, not at all.
Right.
It's not about, a lack of choice, but more about recognizing that God is guiding us,
Okay.
in our lives.
Yeah.
Think of it less like a predetermined path and more like a loving parent kind of gently nudging us in the right direction.
Hmm?
And this excerpt actually references 2 Corinthians 3.17,
Yeah.
which talks about, the freedom that we have in the Spirit.
Oh,
So God doesn't force us down a certain path, but he offers guidance, and
Yeah.
direction if we're open to it.
I like that. That makes me think about all those times in my life where I've felt like torn between what I want and then what I think might be God's plan. How do we learn to recognize that gentle nudge, from God?
That's a great question, and it's something that I think we all struggle with.
Yeah.
And, this excerpt, it dives into some common relationship myths that can really cloud our judgment when it comes to, discerning God's will.
So you mean like all those fairy tales we're always hearing about, happily ever after, and
Exactly.
finding the one?
Yes, like the one. One of the myths this excerpt talks about is that idea that there's only one person for you.
Okay.
And thinking like that can create a lot of pressure,
It can.
anxiety.
Uh-huh.
It turns every relationship into this high stakes test with like the possibility of failing looming over you.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that God's plan is so much bigger than just finding a spouse.
Okay, so if we let go of that whole one right person thing, what does that how does that change how we look for a partner?
Right. Yeah. Well, this excerpt really emphasizes how important obedience to God's will is,
Okay.
even when it's not exactly what we want,
That-
It's not about getting what we want. It's about surrendering to a plan that might be bigger and better than anything we could even imagine,
Wow. That makes me think about that verse in Mark 11.24,
Uh-huh.
where it talks about believing you've already received what you're asking for in prayer. Do you think that, ties into this idea of obedience?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It does. It's not about, demanding things from God,
Right.
but about aligning our hearts and our minds with his will.
Okay.
And the author of this excerpt, she shares her own experience about praying for a good husband.
Mm-hmm.
And she emphasizes that her prayer, wasn't just about her own happiness.
So she wasn't just looking for someone who, checked all the boxes on her ideal partner list.
Right, exactly. Her prayer went much deeper than that. It was about finding someone who would fit into God's plan for her life.
Oh,
Someone who wouldn't just be a good husband, but would also help her serve God's kingdom
yeah.
in a way that she couldn't do alone. It's a really powerful example of how obedience can lead to a much more fulfilling relationship, an impactful relationship.
I'm curious, though, does this idea of a destiny partner mean that God, intends for everyone to get married?
Right.
What about those who, feel called to a different path?
Yeah, that's a really important question.
Yeah.
And it's one that I think we need to to explore a bit further.
Okay.
The excerpt focuses on choosing a spouse,
Mm.
but the message, it resonates, I think, even if marriage isn't part of your personal journey.
Oh, okay.
What's crucial here is that emphasis on aligning our desires with God's plan,
Okay.
whatever that looks like for each of us.
I see. I see. So it's kind of like this excerpt goes beyond just giving like tips on how to find a spouse.
Right.
It's about approaching, all of our relationships
Mhm.
with a deeper sense of purpose,
Yeah.
And intentionality.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that our relationships, whether they're romantic or not, are all part of this larger tapestry
Oh, wow.
that God is weaving.
Okay.
And the choices that we make in those relationships, they can either, they can bring us closer to him or they can lead us further away.
That is a powerful image. And that makes me want to like unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
How does this idea of our relationships, reflecting a larger tapestry,
Yeah.
how does that affect the choices we make?
Right.
Does it change how we view, even like casual friendships or family dynamics?
It absolutely can.
Yeah?
And this is where the excerpts focus on God's protection. This is where it becomes really relevant.
You mean that idea that God wants to protect our hearts,
Yeah.
especially in a world that, the author describes as like perverted by the enemy?
Exactly. This excerpt reminds us that the world, it can be a really challenging place.
You can.
And, our relationships are often where we're most vulnerable.
Yeah.
But when we approach those relationships from a place of faith,
Right.
seeking God's guidance, his protection,
Okay.
we create a space where love can really flourish.
It's like building a fortress around our hearts,
Yeah.
guarding ourselves against all the negativity and brokenness that can seep in.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's about creating a safe haven where love can thrive,
Mhm.
a space where we can be our authentic selves
Yeah.
and experience the fullness of God's love, both individually and as a couple.
That makes me think about all those times when I've felt tempted to settle in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe out of fear of being alone,
Right.
or just because it, seemed good enough on the surface.
Yeah.
But this excerpt is like really pushing me to dig deeper and to ask myself
Yeah.
if those relationships were truly aligned with what God wanted for me.
That's a brave and important question
Yeah.
to ask.
It is.
And it brings us right back to that core message of this excerpt.
Okay.
Choosing a spouse wisely, it's not about finding someone who just makes you happy.
Right.
It's about aligning with God's plan for your life.
Yeah.
Even when it's hard or it's uncomfortable in the moment.
So it's less about finding someone who completes you
Right.
and more about finding someone who challenges you to grow and to become like the best version of yourself.
Yeah, you got it. And that kind of growth often involves stepping out of our comfort zone,
Oh, yeah.
and trusting that God's plan, even if it looks different from what we imagined, it's going to lead us to something more, a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment.
It sounds like there's a lot to unpack here about the role of faith and obedience in choosing a spouse.
There is.
We've touched on some key ideas, but I really want to dive even deeper into like the practical implications of all of this.
Yeah, I agree.
Do not-
There's so much more to explore here, especially when it comes to discerning God's will in our relationships and understanding how our choices, they don't just impact our own lives, they impact the lives of those around us too.
Right, exactly. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Let's I think we need to keep digging into this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll delve into some more specific strategies,
Love it.
from this excerpt that can really help us navigate this whole journey
Okay.
of finding a partner who aligns with God's plan for our lives.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned. All right, we're back and ready to go even deeper with this whole idea of aligning our relationships with God's plan.
Yeah.
Before the break, we were talking about how this concept applies, even if marriage isn't really on the horizon for someone.
Right. And I think it's really important to point out that, discerning God's will in our relationships, it's not about finding this set of rules, you know?
Or some magic formula.
Right.
It's more about like cultivating this open heart, listening and being willing to trust God's leading,
Okay.
even when it might take us in a direction we weren't expecting.
So it's less about like checking boxes and more about just,
Yeah.
staying connected to that gentle nudge we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And this excerpt it offers some practical insights
Okay.
into how we can actually do that.
Okay.
It emphasizes, prayer,
Yeah.
but not as a way to demand things from God,
Right.
but as a way to seek his
Like,
guidance,
okay, yeah.
his wisdom.
So instead of just like, rattling off this wish list of qualities that we want in a partner,
Right.
we should be asking God to show us his plan,
Yes.
even if it looks different than what we thought.
Yeah, exactly. It's about surrendering our own, limited view
Right.
and trusting that God's vision for us is bigger.
And better and more fulfilling than anything we could come up with on our own.
It's funny because that makes me think about those times when I've prayed for something so specific,
Yeah.
maybe even like a particular person,
Right.
and it just hasn't worked out
Yeah.
the way I hoped it would.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like, looking back,
Right.
I can see how those situations, even though they were, disappointing at first,
Mm-hmm.
they actually led me to something better,
Yeah.
something that was more aligned with God's plan.
That's a powerful testimony
Yeah.
to God's faithfulness. Even when our plans fall apart,
Yeah.
he's still working
Yeah.
behind the scenes, weaving together this beautiful tapestry
Mhm.
that we often don't, really appreciate until later.
I keep coming back to that image of the tapestry. I
Yeah.
love that because it reminds me that our lives and our relationships
Right.
are all interconnected in ways that we don't always see,
Right.
But God sees the whole picture,
He does.
and he's using every thread, every experience to create something beautiful and meaningful.
And, that brings us to another important point from this excerpt,
Right.
which is the importance of finding a partner
Yeah.
who shares your values, your faith.
Well,
When two people are, united in their commitment to God,
yeah.
their relationship, it becomes more than just a romantic partnership.
Right.
It becomes this force for good in the world.
It's like having like a teammate in your corner.
Yes.
Someone who gets you
Yeah.
and encourages you to live out your faith
Mm-hmm.
in a way that, you maybe couldn't do alone.
Exactly. And the excerpt, it actually talks about how
Yeah.
God designed marriage to be a reflection
Okay.
of his love for the church.
Wow.
It's this sacred covenant, a partnership
Yeah.
that goes way beyond, just personal fulfillment.
Right.
And it points to something bigger, something that reflects, God's plan.
His plan for humanity.
Yes, for humanity.
That's a really beautiful
It is.
and profound way to think about marriage.
Yeah.
It's not just about like finding someone who makes you happy.
Right.
It's about finding someone who helps you become more like Christ.
Yeah.
And who joins you in that mission,
Yes.
of spreading God's love to the world.
And that's where obedience, that idea of obedience,
Okay.
it comes full circle when we submit our desires to God's will.
Yeah.
When we choose a partner who aligns with his plan.
Right.
We open ourselves up to this love and fulfillment
Yeah.
that we can never get on our own.
It's like saying yes to this grand adventure,
Yeah.
trusting that God's going to lead us
Mm-hmm.
through every twist and turn.
Every mountain, every
Yeah.
valley.
Yeah.
And bring us to a place that's more beautiful than we could ever imagined.
That kind of trust takes like a lot of courage, don't you think?
It really does.
Especially in a world that's, always telling us to just go for instant gratification
Right.
and self-fulfillment.
That's all about me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this excerpt, it reminds us that choosing a spouse,
Right.
it's not about finding someone who completes you or fixes your problems.
Right.
It's about finding someone who walks alongside you on this journey of faith.
Yes.
Someone who, challenges you to grow.
Yeah.
Someone who shares your passion for serving God and making a difference in the world.
And that kind of love
Yeah.
that's rooted in faith and service,
Yeah.
it has this power to transform not only our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us.
Wow.
It's like it creates this ripple effect
Yeah.
that spreads out,
That's beautiful.
bringing hope, healing, joy to
Yeah.
a world that really needs it.
Yeah, it does. I'm really struck by this whole idea of our relationships having this ripple effect,
Uh-huh.
It makes me think about the couples that I've known
Yeah.
who just like radiate God's love
Yes.
in everything they do,
Yeah.
Their relationships aren't perfect,
Right.
of course
not.
but there's this depth
Yeah.
and a purpose there
Yeah.
that goes way beyond like just romantic love.
Right.
It's like they've tapped into something bigger than
Yes,
themselves,
they have. Yeah.
something that fuels their passion for serving others and making a difference.
And that's why, this whole conversation about choosing a spouse,
Yeah.
it's so much bigger than just finding a romantic partner.
Mhm.
It's about understanding the impact that our relationships have on our faith, on our purpose,
Yeah.
and ultimately our ability to leave a mark on the world.
It's about recognizing that love, when it's aligned with God's plan,
Yeah.
it becomes this powerful force,
Yeah, it does.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
for good, and it inspires us to actually live out our faith
Mm.
in bold ways,
Yeah.
in courageous ways.
Yeah.
And that's a message worth like really thinking about,
It is.
no matter, where we are in our own journey of love and faith.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Whether we're single, dating, engaged, married, this whole conversation,
Yeah.
it challenges us to see our relationships differently,
Yeah.
with this new lens.
Okay.
One that puts faith first,
Yeah.
obedience,
Uh,
and this commitment to living out God's purpose for our lives.
this whole deep dive has been so insightful.
It
I
has.
mean, we've covered a lot of ground, from soulmates and destiny partners to
Right.
the importance of prayer, obedience, and choosing a spouse.
Yeah.
And we've explored how our relationships, whether they're romantic or not,
Mm-hmm.
they can really reflect God's love
Yeah.
and his grace to the world around us.
We've talked about the importance of aligning our desires with his plan.
Mm.
And we've seen how choosing a partner who shares our faith
Yeah.
can create this really powerful force for good in the world.
But before we wrap things up,
Okay.
I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
The idea that God's plan might not always look the way we expect.
Right.
You know,
It's so easy to get caught up in our own ideas
it is.
of what a perfect relationship should look like.
Yeah.
But God often has something different in mind.
He does.
Yeah.
And sometimes that vision, it requires us to let go of our own expectations.
It does.
And to surrender to a plan that might feel, unfamiliar
Yeah.
or even uncomfortable at first.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's where faith comes in.
It is. It is.
It's about trusting
Yeah.
that even when we don't see the whole picture,
Mhm.
God is guiding us toward a love that's deeper, more fulfilling, and more aligned with his purpose than anything we could have imagined.
It's about choosing to walk by faith and not by sight.
Yeah.
Knowing that God's plans for us are always good,
They are.
even when, they don't make sense in the moment.
Yes.
And I think that's such a powerful message to carry with us
It is.
as we, continue to figure out this whole love and relationships thing
Yeah.
in a world that often feels, confusing and uncertain. Yeah, it's really freeing to remember that God's vision is never blurry, even when ours is.
It is.
He can see the potential for something beautiful, even when, we're stuck on like what went wrong or what we don't have.
Yeah.
This whole conversation, it makes me think about that quote from the excerpt.
Okay.
The one that really stood out to me. Through Jesus, God gives us grace for things we do not deserve.
That is powerful.
Yeah.
It really is.
What do you think about that?
It shifts our focus, doesn't it?
Mm,
From what we think we've earned
right.
in life or in love
Yeah.
to the generosity of God's love.
Okay.
A God-centered relationship, it's not about, keeping score.
Right.
It's about recognizing that love itself
Yeah.
is a gift.
Wow.
It's undeserved, and that's what makes it so precious.
It's like we're being invited to be part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
Yes.
And it takes the pressure off
Yeah.
of finding the one.
Right.
And instead it's about like becoming the kind of person who can love
Yes.
and be loved
Mm-hmm.
deeply.
You got it.
Yeah.
This excerpt, it's not just a how-to guide for
Right.
finding a spouse.
Right.
It's like a call
Okay.
to cultivate a certain kind of heart.
Okay.
One that's aligned with God's values.
Mhm.
And that spills over into all of our relationships, not just the romantic ones.
Yeah. So even if someone is listening and they're not actively looking for a spouse right now,
Mm-hmm.
what can they take away from this deep dive into choosing a spouse
Yeah.
from a faith-based perspective?
I think the core principles, they apply to any relationship,
Okay.
where we're looking for depth, for meaning,
Yeah.
that idea of discerning God's will.
Mm-hmm.
It's relevant whether we're, thinking about a new friendship,
Mm-hmm.
navigating family dynamics,
Yeah.
or yes, even looking for a life partner.
Right.
It's about that posture of listening
Okay.
to God.
To his guidance.
Yeah, even in those small choices.
And what about obedience? I mean, that word can feel kind of heavy sometimes.
Yeah, it can.
But the way this excerpt talks about it,
Mhm.
it's not about, blindly following rules.
Mhm.
It's more about aligning our lives with a love that's bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And that kind of alignment,
Yeah.
it often leads us to places of greater joy
Yeah.
and fulfillment
Right.
than we could ever get on our own.
Yeah.
Like we're tapping into this source of strength,
Yeah.
of wisdom
Okay.
that's beyond our understanding.
It's almost like surrendering to a dance,
Ooh, I like yeah.
allowing God to lead, even if we stumble a little
We
bit.
all stumble.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
But knowing that even those missteps
Yeah.
can be part of that beautiful tapestry
Yeah.
that he's weaving.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really captures what it means to choose a spouse and really to live a life that's aligned with God's plan.
Yeah.
It's a dance of surrender, of trust, and ultimately just this outpouring of love that goes way beyond ourselves.
I think we've come full circle on this deep dive.
I think so too.
We started by exploring this idea of a destiny partner versus a soulmate, and through all of this, I think we've uncovered a much richer understanding of what it means to choose a spouse.
Yeah.
And to live a life that reflects God's love.
It's been a really, really insightful conversation.
It has.
And I hope that everyone listening, wherever they are in their journey,
Yes.
of faith and relationships, that they found some encouragement, some inspiration
Yeah.
to seek God's guidance and to embrace that power of love that's rooted in obedience and surrender to his plan.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today on the deep dive.
Thank you.
May this conversation spark, even more reflection as you navigate your own relationships, remembering always that God's love is a constant guide,
It is
offering freedom, purpose, and a love that is just beyond our understanding.
beautiful.